History is often taught as a sequence of names, dates, and treaties. But beneath the surface of every civilization lies a darker and more instinctual engine of change. Each time humanity discovered a new way to wield power, a world died. This video is not a technical analysis of weapons. This is the story of how these discoveries irreversibly transformed humans, power structures, and societies. This is the narrative of how humanity, setting out with the promise of increasing security, reached a power that could eventually prepare its own end. Every generation believed it had found the ultimate weapon that would render war obsolete through sheer terror. And every generation was tragically wrong, because each new discovery opened a door that humanity could never close again, and made old ways of life impossible. These were not merely instruments of war. These were keys that opened doors humanity wasn't even aware existed. This story is not just about the deaths they caused, but also about the entire way of life they made impossible to continue. The story of discoveries that ended worlds. In this video, starting from stones and sticks to the discoveries that ended the Age of Swords, how gunpowder equalized the world, and how war became invisible in the modern age, we will witness it all. In each chapter, we will see how a weapon changed not only wars, but societies, power balances, and the value of human life. If you're curious not only about history's winners, but also about the worlds that were lost, don't forget to subscribe to Time's Mysterious World History, because here, we don't just tell history. We follow the dark traces of history. Chapter 1. The First Threshold. The transformation of tools into weapons. In the earliest days of history, there was no distinction between tools for survival and tools for deliberate violence. But the moment this distinction emerged, a new fear and power balance was born in human history. This moment was the first and perhaps the most important threshold that changed the course of history forever. In the beginning, there was no such thing as a weapon. There were only tools. We used a stone to crack walnuts, a stick to dig for roots. But in the depths of the past, perhaps in a moment of hunger, perhaps with fear, perhaps with rage, a human made a choice. They turned the tool in their hand toward another human. In that moment, everything changed. Once this threshold was crossed, there was no turning back. Archaeological records show us a disturbing truth. Skulls from tens of thousands of years ago bear fractures that can only be explained by deliberate violence. Bodies buried with spear points embedded in their bones. This evidence tells us, before building cities, before inventing writing, long before creating art, we had learned to consciously kill each other. The first weapons fundamentally changed the nature of conflict. Brute force was no longer what determined survival. It was intelligence. It was planning. It was tool use. The spear, in particular, introduced a very critical concept in history: distance. The idea of being able to neutralize an enemy without touching them rewrote the rules of violence. This asymmetric advantage gave birth to the reality that security now depended not on the body, but on the tool held in hand. And humanity's first arms race began this way. But these first weapons didn't just take lives. They also created something that didn't exist before: hierarchy. Those with better weapons gained power over those without. Groups with superior tools could dominate others. For the first time in human history, violence ceased to be individual and became an organized force. Chapter 2. The Age of the Sword. Violence transformed into art. For thousands of years, violence was not a power everyone could access. On the contrary, it was the monopoly of a specialized and elite minority. Understanding this period is critically important for understanding how power concentrated in certain hands and how societies were shaped around this power. When metal was discovered, humanity didn't just find a new material, it created a new order. And at the center of this order was the sword. The sword was different from everything that came before it. It was not a transformed tool. It had no other purpose like hunting or farming. The sword existed for only one thing: to kill another human. This made it the first pure weapon in history. This singular purpose elevated the sword and its wielders above ordinary people. Knights, samurai, and professional warriors were not just soldiers. They were the figures upon which society was built. Using a sword effectively required years of training, a lifetime of dedication, discipline, and sacrifice. This concentrated power in the hands of a small class that could devote time and resources to this training. The sword was no longer just a weapon. It was a status symbol, an identity, even a kind of social contract. Societies organized themselves around protecting and supporting this warrior class. Peasants produced, craftsmen worked, administrators ruled. But the right to exercise violence belonged only to those who carried the sword. The wars of this age were personal. Close, face to face, enemies fought looking into each other's eyes. Courage, skill, and physical strength were decisive. Despite all its brutality, this system was stable. Wars generally occurred between small, trained groups. There were certain rules. There was a kind of balance. And this balance lasted for thousands of years. But this world, warrior honor, personal skill, and the order ruled by the sword, was about to end with a discovery no one expected, with an alchemical mistake. Chapter 3: The Great Equalizer, the Accidental Revolution of Gunpowder. The discovery of gunpowder was far more than a new weapon. This discovery initiated the end of a world built upon individual heroism and physical strength. The understanding of warfare shaped by sword, armor, and personal skill gave way to mass armies, numbers, and increasingly industrial destruction. This was a revolution humanity was not prepared for. In 9th century China, alchemists were searching for immortality. Their goal was to find eternal life. Instead, they discovered one of the most effective ways to end it. They called this substance, created from a mixture of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, fire medicine. Initially used in fireworks and for signaling, this mixture irreversibly changed the world's fate when its destructive potential was realized. Gunpowder equalized power. Years of training, physical superiority, or noble lineage were no longer decisive. An ordinary soldier who had learned to use a weapon in weeks could kill a knight who had devoted his life to the art of war in seconds. When firearms first appeared on the battlefield, the warrior elites dismissed them. To them, these weapons were cowards' tools. Where was the honor in pointing a tube and lighting a fuse? But contempt didn't stop bullets. The Battle of Cerignola in 1503 became a symbol of this change. Spanish troops armed with arquebuses destroyed French cavalry, and Swiss pikemen, considered Europe's finest warriors. Warrior honor that had endured for centuries became meaningless in minutes. War was now won not by courage, but by numbers. This reality shook the foundation of the feudal order and radically changed the nature of warfare. Gunpowder's impact was not limited to the battlefield alone. For thousands of years, the castles and walls that protected cities were the ultimate symbol of security. However, with the emergence of cannons, these symbols lost their meaning. The conquest of Constantinople in 1453 painfully demonstrated this reality to the entire world. When Mehmed the Conqueror's massive cannons leveled the walls considered impregnable, it became clear that nowhere was truly safe anymore. It wasn't just the destructive power of these cannons that was decisive, but also the psychological effect they created. It is said their sounds could be heard from kilometers away, their tremors generating fear. The age of defense's absolute superiority had ended. Empires began expanding more rapidly, borders were crossed more easily, and the world became a smaller and more dangerous place than ever. This democratization of violence, ironically, paved the way for larger and more deadly wars. Power was now in the hands of not a few elites, but everyone who could access weapons. Humanity, unknowingly, was advancing toward destruction on an industrial scale, and this was a path with no return. Chapter 4: The Mechanical Slaughterhouse, Industrialized war. With the Industrial Revolution, war ceased to be a struggle between individuals. For the first time, violence was truly transformed into time's industrial process. This was the moment when the chasm between invention and control became clearer than ever before. Battlefields were no longer places where courage or individual mastery were displayed. They became killing fields that operated like assembly lines. One of the most striking symbols of this transformation was the emergence of the machine gun. This weapon elevated the tempo and scale of war to levels previously unimaginable. The Battle of the Somme, which took place in 1916, was etched into memory as one of the most horrific examples of this new reality. On July 1st, in a single day, approximately 20,000 British soldiers lost their lives under the continuous and mechanical fire of German machine guns. This number exposed not only a military failure, but how devalued human life had become. The machine gun rendered the human body meaningless. Death was no longer a sudden duel or an individual defeat. It had been reduced to a matter of logistics and attrition. Courage, experience, or personal talent had lost all meaning. Millions of people were fed into the gears of a relentlessly working machine of destruction. The wars of this age were completely stripped of personality. Soldiers were no longer seen as individuals. They were numbers, statistics, entries in the casualty column of reports. Most of the time, you couldn't see whom you were killing. Before you was not a face, but a distant target. Violence had lost its human touch. Monuments are the silent witnesses of this period. The names inscribed on them are too long to be read individually anymore. Each represents a life, but viewed together, they express only a massive loss. War was stripped of narratives of honor and heroism. What remained was a massive slaughterhouse governed by an unconsciously operating system. For the first time, humanity was completely defenseless against the machines it had created. But even this industrial horror would pale in comparison to the atrocities humanity would later create. The next step would go beyond mechanical power and target the human being itself. Chapter 5. The Invisible Enemy, Crossing the Moral Boundary. There are moments in the history of warfare that represent not just the emergence of a new weapon, but humanity crossing a mental and moral threshold. The use of chemical weapons was exactly such a breaking point. Violence had transcended the body at this point, beginning to target life itself, and perhaps for the first time, humanity collectively attempted to step back from a weapon it had created. On the 22nd of April 1915, during the Battle of Ypres, Allied soldiers in their trenches encountered an unusual sight. From the German lines, a yellow-green cloud was rising. It was advancing slowly with the wind, appearing almost harmless. There was no explosion, no sound of a conventional attack, but within minutes, this silent cloud began killing everything it touched. Chlorine gas wasn't attacking the human body from the outside. It was striking directly from within. It was transforming breathing, life's most basic reflex, into an instrument of death. Soldiers couldn't flee, couldn't hide, couldn't fight back. Their lungs burned. Their bodies began to collapse on their own. This was different from conventional war horror. This was an invisible enemy. Chemical weapons didn't kill more people than other weapons used in history, but the fear they created was much deeper, because these weapons rendered courage meaningless. Training, experience, or heroism made no difference. Everyone was equally defenseless. Death was random and uncontrollable. This horror didn't let humanity go even after the war ended. For the first time, the idea that there are things that shouldn't be done even in war began to be seriously voiced. The international community came together to ban the use of such weapons. The 1925 Geneva Protocol was one of the first serious attempts by nations to collectively reject a weapon because it was too horrific. But this ban also revealed a disturbing truth. Humanity had now proven it could weaponize chemistry. It was understood that science was not neutral, and this awareness brought with it an inevitable question. If chemistry could be turned into a weapon, Could physics be turned into one as well? Chapter 6. The Power of a Sun. The Atomic Age and the Threat of Annihilation. The emergence of the atomic bomb was different from the invention of all other weapons in history. This was far more than developing a more powerful weapon. This was humanity reaching, for the first time, a power capable of completely ending its own existence. War had reached a point where it could target not cities, armies, or states, but civilization itself. In 1945, J. Robert Oppenheimer, witnessing the first nuclear test in the New Mexico desert, recalled a verse from Hindu scriptures. Looking at the light rising into the sky after the explosion, he thought, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." This quote summarized the spirit of the atomic age in a single sentence. The bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki as a result of the Manhattan Project changed the mathematics of destruction forever. 2 bombs erased 2 cities from the map. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives in seconds or from the radiation that followed. This was on a scale never seen in any war before. Now victory was measured not by conquered territory, but by lives destroyed. The atomic bomb rendered conventional war logic meaningless. The size of armies, the courage of soldiers, or strategic genius lost their importance. A single explosion could end everything. For the first time, humanity had a button that could trigger its own end. This new reality gave birth to one of history's strangest paradoxes. This balance, known as mutually assured destruction, made total war between major powers nearly impossible, because in such a war, there would be no winner. Victory would be indistinguishable from defeat. Peace was now secured, not through virtue or compromise, but by holding the entire planet hostage. From that moment on, humanity began living in a different state of consciousness. Civilization was under the shadow of an invisible countdown. Nuclear weapons weren't being used, but their presence was felt at all times. Humanity was living on borrowed time. But the evolution of warfare didn't stop here. In the next step, violence would move away from physical destruction and shift to an invisible, silent, and virtual realm. Chapter 7. The Invisible Battlefield. Modern Conflicts. War no longer shouts, it whispers. Today, war is no longer defined by smoke, explosions, or fronts. It is becoming increasingly abstract, more remote, and more invisible. The distance between the decision maker and the outcome has never been wider, and this distance has become one of the most dangerous elements of modern warfare. Unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones, are one of the most striking symbols of this transformation. An operator sitting thousands of kilometers away in an air-conditioned room can make a lethal decision by looking at a screen. There's no smell of gunpowder, no sound of explosion, no face before them. The warrior is no longer on the battlefield. The battlefield is confined within a monitor. This physical distance weakens the psychological connection established with the consequences of the decision. Pressing a button is much easier than pulling a trigger. However, this doesn't mean the effect of war on humans has disappeared. On the contrary, some drone operators are known to develop symptoms similar to war trauma, despite never experiencing physical danger. This seemingly risk-free form of warfare opens unexpected psychological wounds. At the same time, another type of war is growing more silently: cyber warfare. In these conflicts, soldiers don't advance and cities aren't bombed. The target is directly the systems themselves. The cyber attacks on Estonia in 2007 paralyzed a country's digital infrastructure. Banks went silent, communications collapsed, the state became dysfunctional. The Stuxnet computer virus that later emerged physically destroyed centrifuges in Iran's nuclear program without a single bullet being fired. This was one of the first moments when code destroyed matter. In this new battlefield, traditional defenses became meaningless. Walls, armor, borders, none of them work against computer code, because the attack no longer comes from outside. It infiltrates the system, invisibly, silently. The evolution of weapons seems to have strangely come full circle. This journey that began thousands of years ago with tangible, visible physical objects has now been reduced to a few lines of code. A weapon is no longer a piece of metal. It's an algorithm, a command, a line of error, and perhaps the most unsettling thing is this. In this war, it's often not even possible to realize when the war has begun. Chapter 8. Conclusion. The choice we constantly make. A repeating pattern is clearly visible throughout history. Every new weapon emerged with the promise of security, and each one only opened the door to greater danger and a more deadly arms race. In this journey from a sharpened stone to weapons consisting of mere lines of code, humanity told itself the same story each time. This time, we'll be safe. But security never came. Every discovery followed the same cycle. First admiration and hope, then horror, then adaptation, and finally an inevitable escalation. The logic behind our inability to break this cycle was simple and convincing. If we don't develop this weapon, we'll be defenseless against those who do. This thought seemed flawless. The result was always tragic. Today, we stand at the threshold of the next link in this cycle. Artificial intelligence and autonomous weapons systems are once again presenting us with the heaviest questions humanity has ever asked. Future generations will evaluate the decisions we make today, just as we judge those who invented gunpowder or split the atom. But there is a truth we must not overlook. All these weapons were created by human will. These are not inevitable consequences of natural laws. They were decisions made. They were conscious choices. The real question is not what we can invent. It's whether we have the courage to choose times not to build times something. Because tools have no will of their own. They only carry our will. And the greatest weapon humanity ever created was never steel or fire. The greatest weapon was the belief that power could replace wisdom. If this video has given you a new perspective, you can continue this journey by subscribing to my channel. Your like helps such content reach more people. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.